Today's main topic is inspired by this comment from Manuel Campbell 6219. First and foremost, thank you for leaving this comment, and for all of you who have left comments on YouTube or Rumble, I've really appreciated a lot of your feedback and ideas for episodes that can be entertaining and helpful here in 2024. And while the original comment's relatively long, I want to focus in on these two paragraphs. Comment reads, if you want to dig a little deeper into the math of retirement planning, you can read about what we call the retirement risk zone. You will easily find material on the subject on the internet, so I won't get into the details here. But the big picture, anything between a 3 to 6% fixed withdrawal rate is called the retirement risk zone. This is a place where your portfolio can either go spiraling down if you are not careful, if you end up withdrawing more than 6% fixed per year, or it can grow into an absurdly large amount if you end up withdrawing less than 3%. Usually, anything below 3% fixed withdrawal rate adjusted for inflation will assure income in perpetuity, whereas anything above 6% fixed withdrawal rate adjusted for inflation will assure depletion of assets sooner or later. Anything in between is the retirement risk zone. That's essentially what you have calculated in the Monte Carlo calculation inside this video. Now, this comment was made on the video where I covered my study on retirement safe withdrawal rate strategies and the risks that can be associated therewith given different retirement horizons, portfolio mixes, and withdrawal strategies. For the rest of the main topic, we're going to be diving into the risk zone a little bit more and how it can help you. When I Googled the risk zone, I found a lot of graphs that look like this. They kind of show, what I'm assuming in this graph is your nest egg value in the y-axis and time on the x. And as time goes on, you have the accumulation phase. Then 5 to 10 years before retirement begins, you have the start of the risk zone. The image we're looking at here shows it in a darker blue. Then 10 years into retirement, 5 to 10 years into retirement, the risk zone continues, and it's thereafter that the risk zone sort of dissipates. Now, the comment we had bracketed the risk zone between 3 to 6% withdrawal rates relative to the running nest egg value. We have an assumed idea, given the video the comment was on, that we're going to be using the constant dollar method, where we choose a percentage of our initial retirement nest egg. We make that our income for our first year in retirement, and then take that income and correct it for inflation moving forward, in hopes that as the market goes up and down, we can maintain consistent buying power through our income there, through our distributions, without putting the nest egg at risk of going under before our retirement ends. Before we dive into the example I made for graphically representing the risk zone, I want to ask, why does this matter to us? Why do we care? Well, if we're within the risk zone, if we, be it in time or with our relative withdrawal rate, we can recognize that we are either in a position where we're no longer exposed to some unknown risks when we're within the risk zone, or we can recognize that if we've left the risk zone in a direction that could leave our nest egg spiraling down to nothing, leaving us with more life at the end of the money, well, we can catch it. We can find the warning signs. We can make a course-correcting shift. If we're watching the way our nest egg is behaving, watching the markets relative to our income plan that we had, well, we can recognize when we've left the risk zone, either to a lower risk or a higher risk category. This can get a little bit messy, so if you have the video, I'm going to be showing a graph of 250 Monte Carlo simulations that I did to hopefully make this a little simpler. I know this graph just looks intimidating, but we're going to get through it. If you're listening to the audio only, I recommend that you at least check out the video after the fact so that you can see what this graph looked like. So let me explain what we got here. Over here on the y-axis, we have the percentage of our fixed dollar method withdrawal rate relative to our running nest egg. So if we had $1 million, let's say we follow the 4% rule, we pull out 40 grand the first year. Correct that for inflation moving forward. That's fixed, that's flat relative to inflation. However, the market goes up and down. And as the market goes up and down, the value of that 40 grand, corrected for inflation, is going to be a different percentage of our nest egg year after year, by quite a bit in some cases. Down here on the x-axis, I simply have time. Basically, every 5 years is marked. I've drawn a black rectangle for what I believe represents the risk zone by my interpretation of the particular graph. And then I've also colored each individual simulation. Now let's talk about the simulations. We've got a bunch of lines here on the graph. Each one represents what you could think of as the stock market doing something different in the future. Have you seen that clip from that popular Marvel movie where Doctor Strange is sitting there and he says,
"Went forward in time to view alternate futures, to see all the possible outcomes of the coming conflict."
Well, you can think of each one of these lines as a different multiverse of the stock market as to what it might do if we simulate the different decisions, if you will, that the market can make month after month and repeat it over and over and over. We can get an idea of the likelihood that the market will behave in a particular way. That gives us some statistical risks that we can understand. Now, I want to mention that these red lines, the red versions of the stock market, these are the ones that fail before 30 years for this example. All of the purple lines that are over here are ones that start trending like they're going to fail, but they don't actually run out of money before the end of a 30-year time horizon. They get close, but they don't actually fail. And then down here, we have a whole bunch of green lines that end up becoming a very small percentage or negligible percentage of the running nest egg value. These are the ones that not only succeeded, but the ones that are really, really, really low are the ones that have nest eggs that blew up in value. These are the portfolios with such little perceived risk by those whose lived experiences fall along the green lines that they may grow to believe that the 4% rule, if it's the one they implemented, was way too conservative. And this is what we need to recognize. We're going to have people in our lives who have an experience where they ended up falling on a red line and they saw that the 4% rule wasn't conservative enough. And they're going to fall on that half of the extreme. They're going to fall on that half of the road that saw the lady with the blue side of the dress. Then they're going to be the people who have the experience down on the green part. They're going to see the 4% rule as being wildly over conservative. Their experience is going to be that they could have taken a whole bunch more out of retirement, that they were needlessly fear-mongered into taking out a little bit, and they could have enjoyed their lives so much more. Meanwhile, the reality is here that both options, both the red lines and the green lines, and also these purple lines, which are quite numerous in between, exist. They're all possibilities. Now, for this particular example that I ran, I utilized my 401k, my 401k portfolio, 70% mix into retirement. The other 30% is going to be in a bond index fund. And this particular graph utilized the 4% rule in order to run these simulations. Now let's talk about the risk zone over here. Given our goals in retirement, we might want to be on a purple line if our goal is to spend everything. Or if we want to leave a lot of money to our heirs, or we want to make sure that we're really, really not exposing ourselves to the potential of running out of money at all, we might want to be on a green line. Either way, inside the risk zone here, inside the weird box, there are red lines, there are green lines, and there are purple lines, and they're all mixed together. It's almost impossible to recognize in the space within the box whether or not you're on a red line, a purple line, or a green line. Let's talk about the boundaries of this risk zone. For this particular example, I found the bottom, just like in the comment that inspired this episode, that the bottom of the risk zone exists somewhere around 3%. Also, the top of the risk zone here lives around 6%. And lastly, and this is a little bit of an arbitrary gray area, I guess you could like fade it out here, we see that it's about 10 years into retirement where the risk zone starts to dissipate and you're either more definitively on a red line, a green line, or purple. So how do we practically use this? If we end up in the first 10 years of retirement, for this particular example, it's going to be different for everyone's portfolio and everyone's time horizons. But if we end up above the bar in the risk zone, we know we're very, very likely going to be on a red line. We can see up here, if you're looking at the graph, that there are a lot more red lines coming out of the top of the risk zone than any other color. There are others. There's some green lines and some purple lines, but the bulk of them are red. So if we end up with a relative withdrawal rate that is above 6% of our rolling nest egg value, we have reason to try to make a correction to drop back into the risk zone until sometime after the 10-year mark. Down here, on the other hand, if we end up dropping below 3% for our relative withdrawal rate or distribution value, we can see that we're very, very, very likely going to be on a green line. Almost everything below is a green line. And then over here on the side, let's say in 10 years you don't pop off the top or go down the bottom. You come out the side. If you come out the side and you trend this way in time, somewhere between 6 and 3%, you can be much more confident that you're on a purple line. I personally find this example to be really helpful in a nice visual of risk. You can look at the concentration of red lines, purple lines, and green lines and recognize there's a lot more green lines following a constant withdrawal rate on the 4% rule. And the red lines are farther and few between, but they still exist. Now, to drive home this example, let's jump into a graph that represents the exact same situation, but this time, if our nest egg goes below its initial buying power, we're going to drop our 4% withdrawal rate down to 3% until the market recovers and our nest egg goes back above its initial inflation-corrected buying power. And that's going to be this graph, and if you can see the video, I can probably count the red lines on my two hands and not run out of fingers. I'm going to slide between them. This is the original. This is using the floor. The thing that blows my mind the most is making a risk zone that includes red lines, green lines, and purple lines becomes a lot bigger, and the bulk of what's in the risk zone is green. And the purple lines have dissipated significantly too. I'm going to slide back between them again. Look, there's a nice concentration of purple. It almost looks like my alma mater moving through the middle of the graph. Meanwhile, with the change to utilizing a 3% withdrawal rate when the market dips and the buying power is diminished in our nest egg, well, the purple lines are farther and fewer between. So if our main goal is to reduce risk in retirement, the risk of running out of money early, before the end, well, this looks like a very viable strategy that visually just seems a lot more relaxing. Now, I wasn't originally going to cover this again because the 8% safe withdrawal rate that Dave Ramsey gives is abysmal, very risky. But, I figured you'd be curious too. What does an 8% withdrawal rate graph look like? This is the same example done again, but this time we're using Dave Ramsey's 8% safe withdrawal rate instead of the 4%. You'll see that the risk zone is significantly raised as the purple and green lines now live between 6 and 10%. The risk zone also now lasts a whopping 20 years. Oh, and the bulk of the graph is red. Most of them explode and go bye-bye. The purple lines are still far and few between compared to the original 4% rule, but where I'm sitting right here in the green lines, there's not a lot going on. The green lines are as sparse as the red lines in the original 4%, basically flipping risk on its head, if it's not even thinner. What I'm seeing here is emotionally unsettling.